So you've bought the mole or are looking to buy it. In this video, I'm going to show you the best ways to use the mole to make big money in Star Citizen. For those who don't know, the mole stands for Multi-Operator Laser Extractor. But in this video, we're going to turn the mole into the soul, because we're greedy. Although if you still want to mine with your buddies, you should still watch this. Now the first question is, where should you mine? I'm going to assume that you know most, if not all, the locations where you can mine Quantanium. But if you don't, I have covered this in a previous video that you can watch later. There's really only one place where you can reliably mine and harvest large amounts of Quantanium, and that is Lyria, one of the moons at ArcCorp. Not saying you can't do this anywhere else, but this is what I've experienced. That's because in Lyria, Quantanium deposits only spawn in clusters. Every rock in Lyria other than Quantanium rocks will spawn individually, making them very easy to find. Now when it comes to scouting these rocks, the mole is absolutely terrible for this. The Argo mole handles like a truck and has the mileage of a truck. In fact, mining and flying to a refinery alone could consume over a quarter of your hydrogen reserves. Here's a strategy I devised to scout Quantanium. With the Argo mole, travel to Lyria and then warp to one of the orbiting OM markers. Remember the marker where you parked your mole. Then kill yourself and spawn back at the refinery. Get a small cheap ship and fly to Lyria. Fly to the surface of Lyria, pick a direction, and start scouting. Once you found your desired cluster, take note of the closest point of interest and its direction. Then fly back to the marker where you parked your mole. Once you're in your mole, fly to the point of interest you noted, then just fly towards the direction opposite that you noted. For example, this cluster is located 164 kilometers away from this outpost at a direction of 320. To get to this cluster, fly to Sal 5 in your mole, then turn towards 140, then fly 164 kilometers in that direction. Optionally, you can start a delivery mission to pick up a box that will act as your marker. When you find a desirable cluster, exit your ship and place the box so you can always pinpoint exactly where the cluster is located. But killing yourself won't be that practical in the near future, if you can believe it. So if you don't want to kill yourself, you can always scout with your mole. I recommend flying at around 350 meters per second. It's fast, but not too fast that you won't be able to react or maneuver. You have less than an hour to scout with your mole before you should consider refueling. When you have about 1/3 hydrogen fuel left, you should head to these outposts to refuel and if necessary, repair your mole. One helpful tip is to never leave your mole idling. When I say that this ship guzzles a lot of fuel, I mean it. If you're going to go AFK, log out on your bed or land your ship and turn off the engine. But if you don't want to scout with your mole, you can fly the mole to Baijini, then retrieve your scouting ship and fly to Lyria and start scouting. When you find a good cluster, know where it is and fly to Baijini to retrieve your mole. Now let's talk about loadouts. All the lasers on the mole that I use is the Lancet MH2 laser. I use the front laser as a dedicated extraction laser, although it can also be used to fracture smaller fragments. The most obvious reason is that it's the closest to the cockpit and has a larger angle of rotation compared to the side lasers. These are the modules I use for the front, although if you want the least amount of inert materials, you can opt for 3 Xdrxl modules in exchange for a slower extraction rate. Here are the locations where you can buy the Xdrxl and Xdrxl modules. Conveniently, they can both be bought at ArcL1. For the side laser, the right laser is my main fracturing laser because it's closer to the ladder, and the left is my backup. You will need the Surge and Stampede module as they are necessary to fracture big rocks. The Vox C3 module is a good choice as a third since it offsets the added instability from the Stampede laser, and the 4% green zone debuff is barely noticeable. Another good choice would be the Optimum module. This essentially doubles the green zone and gives you a higher margin of error when using the Surge module. Here are the locations where you can buy the Vox C3 module. Here are the locations where you can buy the Optimum module. Conveniently, they can both be bought at ArcL1. But how do you know if a cluster is good? Well, first, you need to know how to calculate how many SUs of minerals a rock has. Fortunately, this website will easily help you calculate how many SUs a rock will contain. But if you don't want to alt-tab a lot, here's the formula to calculate deposit SCUs. Generally speaking, I scan all clusters that I see, including pairs. Some people avoid them, but I had instances where I found some thick pairs. But if one rock in the pair is trash, don't bother scanning the other one. While scanning the cluster, I only pay attention to rocks that have at least 15% Quantanium. I don't have a specific spot for finding giant clusters of Quantanium, but in my experience, I had more luck searching near outposts and points of interest compared to out in the open. One pro tip though, it is better to scout on the sunny side of Lyria because you will have a direct path back to ArcL1. That way, when you found and mined a cluster, you will save time traveling back to the refinery versus mining in the dark side. So let's say you found a desirable cluster. Here's what you should do. You most likely will only be able to harvest 3 rocks, maybe 4 at the most, so you should focus on the most valuable rocks in the cluster. Once you've noted the deposits you want to harvest, you should fracture in the order of the least valuable deposit and its fragments first, and the most valuable deposit and its fragments last. That way, you can immediately start extracting the most valuable one. By the time you reach the least valuable rock, you have harvested most of the quantanium and you have time to leave if needed. Here's how to mine rocks. This mainly applies to rocks that weigh more than 5900. When you start fracturing, you should immediately use the surge module. Let the charge level fall to the point that using the surge module will boost it to the top of the green zone. This will require a lot of practice because it takes a lot of eyeballing to accurately guess a 40% charge. Then use the stampede module to quickly charge the green zone as the laser isn't powerful enough to hold the charge. If you're using the optimum module instead of the Vox, you'll have to estimate the 40% boost within the potentially expanded green zone. Once the charge dips to the level where you can boost to the top of the expanded green zone, activate the optimum module and then activate the surge module. Once the charge level dips to around a half to 2/3 of the boosted green zone, activate the stampede module. If it doesn't dip to that level, you should start lowering the charge as this effect only lasts 20 seconds. Then activate the stampede module. In both cases, it's okay if you did not fracture it on the first try because of instability RNG. Just let the charge dip to desired levels, then try again. If you run out of surge and or stampede charges, use the backup laser. If you're in a situation where you fractured a rock but the fragments don't fall out, or there are fragments on top of each other, gently ram your ship into the fragments. Use enough force such that the fragments will be spread out on the floor, but don't do this if your mole is seriously damaged. One disadvantage of planet mining is that fragments might glitch under the surface. You can still fracture it if a small part is sticking out, but most of it will fall through the surface and will be lost once fractured. Now that you've fractured everything worth fracturing, head to the front laser and start extracting. Make sure you position your ship so that you have almost a top-down view on the fractured rocks. If you found some very special rocks that have more quantanium than your mole can carry and you have a good memory, you can try to extract only 100%ers. One pro tip, I covered this before, but I like to thank Razorburn for this comment. If you want to reliably avoid descending the ladder, just walk backwards towards the ladder and you'll fall straight down. This works on both the front and back ladders and will allow you to save valuable seconds when mining and harvesting quantanium. When the instability timer approaches 5 minutes, you should leave and head back to the refinery. As I mentioned earlier, this ship has terrible handling, which can make approaching the space station difficult. Here's the easiest way to do it. When you're about 24 kilometers away from the space station, aim the ship slightly below the landing pad. Then accelerate until you reach around 590 to 600 meters per second. At that point, stop accelerating and let your mole drift towards the space station. Once you've landed on a space station, assuming you've set your spawn at the space station, kill yourself and your ship will automatically be stored. But this might not be practical in the near future, so here's an alternative that's almost as good. Once you've landed on a space station, log out. Then log back in and you'll spawn in the hab area and your ship will be stored. But for the sake of completeness, here's how much time it would take to exit the mole, head to the lobby, and store it. When it comes to refining, since you're going to be refining a lot more quantanium, it could take up to 6 days to fully refine all of the quantanium. If you want more quantanium, you can go to Crew 1 to get an extra 3% yield on refined quantanium. But to get there, you must use the XL1 quantum drive. In fact, I highly recommend you get the XL1 drive for your mole for any situation. And if you want to know why, along with a lot of other great info, click this video here.